How to sound more natural in English. So it depends what you mean when you say sound natural. Because when some people say sound natural, they think, I want to sound like an American. I want to sound British. I want to sound Australian. And that's one way of thinking about natural. Some people think that natural means sound like a native speaker. Um, but natural could also just mean comfortable and confident and able to use the language well, even if your accent does not sound like the accent of a native speaker. So if by natural you mean sound like a native speaker, just listen to native speakers every day and repeat the things that you hear. And do all the other things that you should be doing. Practice, read, write, listen, speak. Do all those things every day. But if you want to sound like a native speaker, the one main thing that you really need to do is listen to the native speakers that you want to sound like. If you want to sound American, listen to Americans every day. If you want to sound British, listen to British people every day. But if when you say natural, you just mean that you want to sound confident, relaxed, comfortable, able to use the language easily, you just need to practice a lot. The more you practice, the more comfortable you become. And also spend time listening to native speakers. Not so that you will sound exactly like them, but just so that you know what things we say, what things are real. For example, maybe your teacher is not a native speaker, so they give you a sentence that no one would ever say in real life. But you don't know that because you only listen to your teacher, you never listen to native speakers. So listening to native speakers still is important to learn what we say and what we don't say. But if you just want to be comfortable speaking, you don't need to copy their accents or things like that. Um, I like this question. In fact, I like this question so much that I wrote a whole ebook about it. If right now you can't think in English at all, one of the number one things that I recommend is just look around and try to say to yourself in your head in English, what is that? Do I know what that is? Do I know what this is? What is that? And when you see it, try to think the English word. Sofa. But you're not saying it. I'm saying it so you can hear what I'm doing. But really, it's just in your mind. So start with simple things. That is a sofa. What is that? That is a cell phone. What are those? Those are lights. So start with very simple sentences that you are confident with, because really this is about, it's not about suddenly, like one day you just wake up and you think everything in English. That's not how it works. You need to start with the basics and become very comfortable with the basics and build the habit. And every week, every month, you'll be able to do a little bit more easily. It becomes a habit, it becomes natural. But in the beginning, it's not going to feel natural. Well, for most people, it's not going to feel natural. And when that becomes very easy, you can get a little bit more advanced. For example, if you're standing in line at the grocery store or at the bank, you can just think in your head, how do I feel right now? What am I doing right now? And try to answer those questions in your head. But yeah, I explain all of this in a lot more detail with a few other methods as well in the ebook that I shared in the comments. And if you're interested, That link has that ebook. It also has my ebook about 8 ways to practice speaking without a partner, and it also has my new guide, English in 30 Minutes, which teaches you basically what I recommend doing every single day to improve your English, even if you only have 30 minutes per day. But I want to be clear about this. That guide is not only for people who only have 30 minutes per day. In fact, if you have 1 hour per day or 2 hours per day, the things that I recommend in that guide work even better. So for anyone who's interested, that link is now in the comments. Hi teacher, how can I go from level B1 to C2 very quickly? The answer is that you probably will not. So B1 is intermediate, like basic intermediate. B2 is upper intermediate. C1 is advanced. C2 is basically the same as a native speaker, maybe better, because you've studied a lot of grammar. So how do you go from intermediate to super advanced very quickly? You probably don't. However, just general advice for getting from intermediate to advanced is to remember that that is a lot more difficult, in my opinion and my experience, personally and professionally. Getting from intermediate to super advanced is a lot harder than getting from nothing to intermediate. So to go from here to here is actually pretty easy. But to get from here to here requires a lot more focus. It requires a lot more strategy. You need to be thinking a lot more about, what do I need to improve? What are my weaknesses? What are my goals? It requires more of a plan, or it requires using the language every day for a long time. And each day you'll learn a few new things. Each day you'll get more confident, but that's not going to be very fast unless you have a plan. If I listen to something in English and only understand 50%, should I listen to it many times until I understand it 100%? So this is an interesting question. It depends on why you don't understand it. If you don't understand it because there are words that you don't know, listening to it again and again is not going to help you, because you still don't know what those words mean. If the problem is just the speed of the speech, then maybe yes, you should listen to it again and again. However, I don't want you to listen to the same thing 50 times, especially if it's 10 minutes long. And this is part of why I speak so clearly in my videos. Sometimes people say, teacher, you should speak more naturally. But if I spoke naturally, many of you would only understand 20% of what I'm saying. And to understand the stuff that I'm explaining, you'd have to spend 2 hours watching a 10-minute video, and that would be crazy. So if the problem is just the speed, then yeah, maybe you should listen a few times, but don't listen to it many times. And if it feels frustrating, if it feels really boring, if you feel like, I don't want to do this, don't do it. Stop. Do things that you enjoy. But if the problem is the vocabulary, because there are words that you don't understand, then after your first time listening, the first time you listen to something, I always recommend listening to the whole thing. Don't stop. Don't pause it. Don't look up words. Just listen to the whole thing nonstop, just to get comfortable listening and see how much you understand. At the end, you might say to yourself, wow, I understood all of that. Or at the end, you might say, wow, I only understood 20% of that. If you only understood 20% of it, I don't recommend going back and looking up every word, because that's a lot of work. If you only understood 20%, what I recommend doing is saying, okay, that was difficult. Right now, this is too advanced for me, but save the link and listen to that video again the next week, 2 weeks later, 1 month later, 3 months later. And when you come back in the future, you'll listen to the same thing and it will be easier. And that's one of the best ways that you can really see your progress, even when you feel like you're not improving. Because when you come back and you listen to something that you didn't understand 6 months ago, but now you understand almost all of it, you're going to see, wow, I really am improving, even though you might not have noticed that. So yeah, basically, no, I don't recommend listening to the same thing a whole bunch of times. But if you feel like it might help, then yeah, listen to it 1 more time, 2 more times, 3 more times. But if you've listened to it 2 more times, 3 more times, and it feels like it's not helping, then stop.